Welcome, everybody, to the Building Effective Work Instructions. We'll give everybody a minute to get into the room, into the space. We're going to give everybody just 1 second to log in. We've got our participants filing in at the moment.
Okay, very good, because it booted me and I went, oh no, did I miss the introduction?
Nope.
Good.
All right. Looks like we've settled in. So again, welcome everybody to Building Effective Work Instructions. This is going to be our advanced concept. So those of you that were here a month ago for us for our beginners concept, welcome back. For those of you that missed the beginners concept, might want to go back and revisit that webinar. We hosted on our YouTube channel and a few other places. It'll give you some of the base content that Becca's going to go through as we work through the slides today. We also have a couple polls throughout there. We'd love to get some active participation from you all just to kind of understand where you're at with your work instructions. And then there will be a couple questions at the end to get some feedback on what other content we could provide in the future to help you build out your work instructions going forward. And with that, I'd like to welcome Becca Resnik. She's a CEO at Translations by Becca. She's the expert here, so you'll hear her doing most of the talking and sharing on that. And I'm Brian Bao. I'm the CEO of Pico, recovering industrial engineer. So I'm going to learn a few things from Becca as we go, try and improve my work instructions in our system also. So with that, Becca, I want to hand over to you and give a recap of what we learned last time.
Absolutely. And are you already sharing the slides? I'm not sure if our attendees can see them, but I cannot.
Okay, let's reshare those slides again.
Perfect. Okay, jumping right in here on the recap, just in case, again, anybody didn't attend that webinar, that covered the basics of writing work instructions. And in this webinar, we're focusing on a little more of the nitty gritty and some of the grammar. And I know as soon as the word grammar left my mouth, some of you went, just please stick with me. Ask questions if you need to. I know a lot of it is from way back when for a lot of people. That's completely understandable. So when we talked about the basics of writing work instructions, I covered that work instructions really boil down to what do I include in the procedure and how do I word that in a simplistic way. So work instructions always need to answer the question, what do I do with my hands? And I thought this point was worth recapping because I think people misunderstood how literal I was being when I said that's what your work instruction needs to do. Some people gave us the feedback that, well, you didn't actually tell us how to write the work instruction. I don't have any simpler way to boil it down than that. I think all of the talk of AI in the media has made people think that there is some magic wand they can wave to write work instructions. There isn't. Just go, if you're writing a procedure for running machine XYZ 3000, walk up to the XYZ 3000 and go, okay, I need to push the start button. That's what they do with their hands. Write that down. That is step one of the procedure. So when I say write what they need to do with their hands, they being the user of your procedure, whether that's somebody on your production line or your customer, I literally mean that's how you write a procedure. Write what they're going to do with their hands. I also think it's worth recapping what I like to call my egg salad sandwich test. So I know from my engineering days, when we're writing a work instruction on a new process or a piece of equipment, we want to write everything in it. We think everybody needs to know everything. Well, they don't. They don't need the information that does not tell them what to do with their hands. So if you're writing your procedure and you're thinking, do they really need to know that sentence? Add something pretty ridiculous after it, such as perform this step next to an egg salad sandwich. And if that sentence doesn't add anything more than the sentence in question, you need to get rid of it because it's not telling them what to do with their hands. They don't need to know that information.
Can
And
I do
then
the same with a PBJ?
do it. PBJ, I like to use before performing this procedure, make sure the machinist is wearing red socks. Or ask if the person at the next station is from Ohio. None of these things matter. So get rid of that step of the procedure if it doesn't add any value compared with an egg salad sandwich, red socks, or someone being from Ohio. And then once we determine what to have in our procedure, we need to word it in a way that uses fewer, simpler, and clearer words. Complex language is really intimidating. And it's really challenging for people who are not native speakers of English or people who have a low reading comprehension level to understand. Average reading comprehension level in the United States is about a 7th grade level. So you want your procedures to be accessible to all groups of people, even if they speak another native language other than English, or maybe don't have a high school education. So once we've moved on from how to write the procedure, we can start looking into some of the more advanced concepts, being structuring our procedure and using grammar for simplicity. And I really want to emphasize here, this topic it's truly technical writing, and there are entire textbooks on this topic. People have PhDs in this topic. So please, no one think that I'm telling you everything you need to know about how to write a well-written work instruction. There is so much to know. I'm just covering the absolute basics of what you need to know to start getting those work instructions to where they are usable and easy to understand. For this webinar, just as we did for the first part of the series, I will be going through the video that you see scrolling through on the screen. This is an actual procedure from the wild. It is on how to construct a 3D printer. It needs so much help. It is incredibly lengthy. It has way too much text, a lot of useless information. It's not well written. It's hard to find the information that you need, and it doesn't have integrated content such as videos.
Right. Let's head to Wizard of Oz.
That's right. So when I talk about structuring a document, I like to remind people that we are creating a yellow brick road. So this is your guideline for how somebody will progress through your procedure. You might not realize it when you read work instructions, but there is a definite way that the grammar is structured to help you understand what the different parts of a procedure mean. They're like road signs. When you see a stop sign, you don't even have to read the word stop. When you are far back enough in the distance that you see a red octagon with a white line around it, you know that sign is going to say stop. Procedures are the same way. When grammar is written in a certain way and when a step is structured in a certain way, you understand innately what that step is trying to communicate to you. So that's the whole purpose of structuring a document well.
I'll jump in.
For the structuring part of this webinar, I'll be looking at this step that is on safety and cleaning, and just look at that wall of text underneath these yellow gloves. It's unwieldy. So this is just a preview of that step.
What do you want me to do here?
A whole lot.
Exactly. I'll move on.
Yeah. When we are looking at the basics of structure, we are boiling this down really to 3 main concepts. And that would be, when do we use paragraphs? When do we use bullet points? And when do we use numbered lists? There are specific and definite times that each of these 3 types of structures come into play. Again, this is that yellow brick road. We are building that structure that when we innately see these types of structures, we know what it's going to tell us. So when do we use a paragraph? This is for explanations. So an example, and again, this is the cleanup version of the safety and cleaning step that you saw on the screen before. All the information that we should put in a paragraph is: the resin is toxic, have running water available nearby, clean as needed throughout the procedure, ensure sufficient ventilation. Looking at the bullet points, the purpose of a bullet point is to give you a list of items of equal importance. So it's just a list of things. No one item needs to happen before the other or is more important than the other. For example, the supplies listed in this procedure are chemical resistant gloves, paper towels, and cleaning solution. And then we have our numbered lists. These are to communicate steps that are to be completed in sequence. For example, turn the exhaust system on, clean the work area, perform printing operations, clean resin from work area. So if we go to the next slide, we will see a visual of the before and after. So what I've done here, that top section with the red X is just a copy paste from the procedure. The bottom section is what I covered from the previous slide. And this is truly a cleanup, meaning that there is no loss of information. I took everything that was actually needed from the previous step, boiled it down into not only the basic information they needed, but the correct structure. So you look at that safety and cleaning step. You have this short paragraph that kind of gives you a broad explanation about safety and cleaning. You have a bulleted list for your supplies. You have a numbered list for the actual procedure that is in there. No loss of information, clear, concise. This is a procedure step that somebody is going to be a lot more willing to read and therefore follow, and you want them to follow your procedure correctly.
I love that. That's the whole idea of the work instructions, to try and get
Bingo.
good quality.
Exactly.
If I take a few of your comments there about structuring it, and this is the example of Pico, and I'm not saying you have to go use Pico to structure it, because I think actually coming from a structured into Pico is probably a lot more helpful for folks. But any digitized work instruction software will help you create that structure and will push you into a place where we reduce the cognitive burden, as it's called, for the operator to kind of follow on from where you're at, of always locating the pictures in the same place, using the numbered structure for the actual steps, giving annotations, arrows, and other things that are the other reference information away from the actual steps. So people, depending on where they're at in their journey to do this activity, will know where to get the pieces of information that they regularly need. And then, like I said, reduces the cognitive burden instead of them trying to read that whole monstrosity of a paragraph that came from the unstructured work instruction. They can then go jump to the important parts. And then once a real digital connected tool comes with it, they also get the feedback loop there, i.e. the connected torque gun that we have on there. So it's really important to kind of follow the path that Becca laid out, from understanding what the work instruction is trying to achieve, and then what are the other pieces of information that come along with it. We're going to take a break here, jump to a couple quick poll questions. We want some of your feedback to understand where you're all at. So we're going to pop up a couple of poll questions that'll help us guide where we're going to go with the next parts of the webinars. So how does your organization currently create work instructions? Are they paper-based? Are you doing some kind of paper on glass in a PDF? Are you having some level of interactive work instructions, or are you just winging it? Give us some feedback here, and let us know what you all are doing right now so we can help kind of filter where our content is going. This will be up here for another couple quick seconds, and then we'll jump over to understand where you're at. And then there'll be one more poll question that goes along with this too. So we appreciate you all engaging with us at this webinar.
Surely
Right.
no one's just winging it. No company would ever do that.
Well, and the answer is 3 land in that bucket. Hopefully those folks are technician led, where they're using the drawing as their work instruction. Okay, so we got a pretty even smattering. There's a lot of folks still sitting on the paper base to the PDF. And then there's about a quarter of everybody is on interactive digital work instructions. And that's generally what we see out in industry, is there's kind of a path towards the digitization. And as we said at the beginning, you don't need to use a full digital tool to necessarily have good practices on your shop floor. It just makes the burden of on the engineer a lot easier to use some of those digital tools. Right, let's jump over to our second poll question here and get some more feedback from y'all as it comes up. System delays. We work our way through. Whilst we're waiting for that, oh, here it is. What is their biggest challenge when creating work instructions? And this is really important, because a lot of this stuff, these questions are actually the resistance to going into those next steps with those work instructions. So we'd love to understand, what are you all seeing as the 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 challenges to stepping through and creating those work instructions? Is it just keeping them up to date? I used to run factories where we had paper over the shop floor, and I can think of a couple of people that used to literally run around and try and find out where those folders had disappeared to. The clear and easy usually is more of a hidden cost. Lots of folks don't necessarily reflect back on that unless you have good practices, like Becca's been pointing to. Getting workers to actually follow them probably is one of the biggest perceived challenges on that, is because once you've done it a couple of times, do you know every step? And then we'll get the feedback on the standardizing across all of your sites or teams. Yeah, as I suspected, getting the workers to actually use them is the biggest challenge. And that's part of where that digital work instruction and good work instructions that actually enable workers comes into this. And it's a really big power of that. So again, appreciate you all jumping in with your feedback so we understand kind of what are some of the challenges that are in and around the work instructions. We'll kind of focus in on how we can address some of those, both in this and potentially some additional webinars to follow. Right, back to our presentation here. Jump into the grammar, the dirty G word of work instructions, but an ever so prevalent and powerful tool that actually is needs to be there.
Absolutely. And that last little segment you said is the key, really, because this is what people forget. They think grammar, that doesn't matter. Who cares how it's written? It can be sloppy. They'll get the point. Your procedure is meant to be read and understood. That is the point of a procedure. So when people, even if you later today, somebody asks you, what'd you do today? And you say, oh, I attended this webinar and this woman talked about grammar, and I don't know if it really matters, or maybe that person will say to you, who cares about grammar? I always bring it back to that concept that it seems like it doesn't matter, but the whole point of a procedure is that anybody can pick it up and understand it. Anybody with the right training, of course. That is another topic, but it's meant to be read and understood. And so even if you're looking at a procedure and thinking, should I really put the time into correcting this? Remind yourself that's the whole point, a usable work instruction.
So going there from the grammar, give us some examples of where the grammar is so powerful.
Yes, and I actually am going to start with an example that ties together grammar and that concept of the yellow brick road of how we are guiding people through our procedure. And that is section headers. Section headers are often misunderstood. Nobody really knows how to write them, and you'll see them written 1,000 different ways, and it's just a whole topic on its own. There is a definite answer to how you write a section header, and the answer to that is a gerund. It's our first grammar term. Please, nobody log off. Stick with me. I'm so sorry. So the gerund is the noun form of a verb. It ends in ing. Now, every word in English language that ends in ing is not a gerund, so be careful, but that's a topic for another day. But the noun form of a verb would be the gerund that it ends in ing, and it tells somebody it's a step that they are supposed to do something for. So this step that we have on screen, step 10, the Z-arm 3D printed parts. This is just a plain noun. It's the noun of an object, the 3D printed parts. But think about what you conceive this step is going to tell you if you read that. If you're looking through a table of contents and you see the Z-arms 3D printed parts, you don't think that's a step that's going to tell you something you're supposed to do. You think this is a section of the procedure that's just going to tell you about the Z-arm 3D printed parts. It's maybe going to give you a spec list. But because I've read this procedure, I figured out, no, they actually want you to do something here. They want you to print the 3D printed parts. So if we go to the next slide, we see a correction here that is how we should properly formulate this section header. So instead of saying the Z-arm 3D printed parts, this should be printing the Z-arms 3D printed parts. That tells somebody, first of all, I need to print this, or second of all, if I'm flipping through the table of contents and I need to know about printing them, I can go to this step because it's going to tell me about printing the Z-arms 3D printed parts. And along with the concept of using the gerund, I specifically want to use that form. So people will also get caught up in different forms of a noun. So people will think, should I use installation of the Z-arm? Should I use installing the 3-arm? How to install the Z-arm? There's a very definite answer. There's only one answer, and it's installing, period, end of story. It is the least wordy. It tells them exactly what they need to do. It tells them that they need to do something for this step. There's really no other way to do it. So the gerund is what you should be using for any step that tells them something that they're supposed to do. Again, if it tells them maybe it gives them a spec list, it tells them about that part, then you can use that plain noun. Otherwise, you want that gerund, such as printing.
This, what you've just covered, is one of the key fundamentals, at least from what I was taught many moons ago. The difference between writing a technical spec, which has almost like a chapter heading, and a work instruction that has a section heading where you're actually trying to get somebody to act on it. And so you're
Bingo.
moving away from here's the parts to here's what you're going to go do with the parts. Am I interpreting that right, where you're going here with this?
Yes, bingo.
Okay,
Yep, right on the money.
right. Let's go a little bit into a little bit further then.
Yes, so this step needed a lot of help as well. I mean, again, this whole procedure did. Step 17, testing the VAT's water tightness. There's some issues with that title, but they did get a gerund. So this tells me that I need to do something for this step. Don't skip over it because it's going to tell me something I'm supposed to do for this step. However, there are a lot of issues with that paragraph, and one that I want to cover, if you'll go ahead and go to the next slide specifically, is modal verbs. I know I said another grammar term. So modal verbs, it's almost like there are a few ways to describe this without getting into intense linguistic terms, but it's like an extra little verb, a verb being an action word. It's like an extra little verb that goes before the main verb. And modal verbs can express possibility, they can express a likelihood, they can express desire, but it's something additional that goes on to that main verb. Our example here, this might help put it into context for people who are going, what are you even talking about? That first section that I have in bold there, this can be done by putting. Can is a modal verb. So instead of this can be done by putting, put down at the bottom with that blue check mark, that first bold word there, just put. Now, can be appropriate in some contexts. However, in this context, it's not, because they didn't actually give you another option in the procedure. They really were just telling you, put a colorful liquid inside the VAT. So don't give them that can. Can becomes ambiguous also because it doesn't actually tell you if that means it's just an option or it's something that should be able to occur. So if you say the button can be, or the speed can change as the button is pressed, does that mean that the speed is able to change and that's just okay? Or does it mean it has to be able to change, that you are checking for the ability that it can change? And I know that gets really nutty, but if you look at some sentences that have the word can, think about the different ways that can be interpreted. It's actually ambiguous. So as much as you can, get rid of the word can. There's a second part in there that I put in bold where it says, and putting the VAT under a white piece of paper. That right there is not actually a modal verb, but it's another point that this procedure can be cleaned up. So just chop that into its own specific imperative statement. So put the VAT under a white piece of paper. And that's really what we're getting at here, is put it in that imperative form, just that simple, quick little order of a verb.
I feel like there's the joke of can you go deeper on that, or I should just say go deeper on that. And you've moved from the are you have the ability to this is a work instruction, you're supposed to be following it. Am I following you where you're going in the right direction with this? If
Yes.
the work instruction is actually supposed to be prescriptive, not referential.
Yes, and that is a really great way to illustrate the fact that a work instruction is so different from just everyday speech. So the way that I'm talking in this webinar right now, or the way that we write emails to each other, the way we converse with each other, we can sort of break these rules because they're not really rules in just everyday communication. We're communicating in a different way. We're getting our points across in a different way. A work instruction is very different. We need to be direct, exact, precise, and concise. So that's a great point. Just in this work instruction, we don't need all those extra little niceties. We don't need anything extra. Get to the verb. The verb is put, period, end of story. That's what they're supposed to be doing in this work instruction.
I love it. Right. Let's move on to the next part of this, which is probably one of my favorite parts of your grammar section. If you want to explain where we're going next.
Yes. So the final point that I want to cover is passive voice. And this is really a complicated topic when it comes to grammar. Even grammarians that I would consider upper intermediate to maybe even lower advanced level get this concept wrong. So we're not going to dive all the way into passive voice. It gets a little bit complex and unnecessary for this webinar, but just understand passive voice is, and I'll give some examples because again, people are going to go, what in the world are you talking about? It's when you can't identify the doer of the sentence. So here again on this screen is just a preview of the step that we're going to be cleaning up. And then on the next slide, I give some specific examples. Now, before I continue, I will also point out passive voice and even modal verbs. These are concepts that you will hear writers and editors say, never, ever, 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 ever use these things. And that nothing is ever black and white.
Hmm.
There might be times that you have to use a modal verb and the sentence just makes no sense without it. Same thing for passive voice. There might be times you absolutely have to, and the sentence just either doesn't make sense or is actually ambiguous or just sounds nutty without it. So I'm not saying never ever use passive voice or modal verbs, but I'm saying the overwhelming majority of the time you should not use them. So the first sentence here in this procedure is a fantastic example. It says, the print bed calibration is done manually. That is a passive sentence. I cannot identify grammatically who the doer of the sentence is. It's supposed to be the person who is completing the procedure. And here's why that directly matters. I can't identify the doer, and therefore I can't identify if I, as someone using this procedure, if this is supposed to be a step that I am supposed to complete. And actually, when I was correcting this procedure, that was exactly what happened is I went, are they just telling me about how the calibration is done, or is this a step that I am supposed to complete? I legitimately didn't know until I got to the end of this step. So your user gets to the end of the step and they go, oh, this is an information I'm supposed to be completing these steps. That's why it's important to have the opposite of passive voice is active voice. That's why it's important to have active voice as much as you can, because it's much more direct. It tells them, I am supposed to be doing this step. And it's also a lot less complicated, a lot less complicated, a lot less wordy. The more that we can chop down the words on the screen, the less intimidating your procedure is going to be. There again, the more likely somebody is going to be to actually read your procedure, therefore do it correctly, therefore meet your quality metrics, not have safety issues, not have frustration if they are a worker or if they're a customer. So how we can correct that first sentence is calibrate the print bed manually. Get straight to that command. It's not the calibration is done manually by some magical entity wherever. No, you need to do that. Calibrate the print bed manually. I'm giving you that order. Same thing for the remainder of this paragraph. If you look at those words that I have in bold and really zero in on those, calibrate, loosen, tilt, loosen, pan, tighten, etc. Those are all in the imperative form, the imperative being the command form. And I'd like to point out also that in that first paragraph, the one with the red X, in that last sentence, there is a section that I have in bold that's not in passive voice, but still needs to be changed to the imperative form. So a height adjustment is also possible. Don't make a vague, nebulous statement of, it's also possible. Tell them what they need to do. And in this step, it was to loosen the top knob to adjust the height. Along with this concept, understand that the word you is not a dirty word. Everybody probably remembers from school that you never use the word you. You're not supposed to do that. Again, this is technical writing. This is different. This is not the same as any other type of, just about any other type of writing. Be direct. So if you need to use the word you, use the word you. So if you wanted to say, for example, if you are so connected to the modal verb of can, and you're saying, I really want to say that they just can adjust the height. Okay, fine. Then use the word you. You can adjust the height. Be direct, because again, when we get in passive voice, or when we get away from identifying who the doer of the sentence is, so that last sentence, a height adjustment is also possible. Again, it's not a passive voice. It's not clear who's supposed to be doing it. When we get away from those concepts, we're getting away from this direct concept of telling the user what exactly they're supposed to do. And now I'll leave you all alone with the grammar. And again, just remember, this barely scratches the surface of the concepts of structure and of grammar, but these are the key topics that I see crop up over and over that need to be corrected in procedures. And with that,
I love your reference back to school
yeah.
because this slide reminds me of one semester I had a philosophy class and also a technical engineering writing course at the same time. And your first section is exactly what I would have written for the philosophy class, where you use very loose structure. You're trying to use a lot of words because you're actually being graded on word count as much as anything else. And the other one is just like the technical writing course, be very specific, and was all about specificity, trying to get somebody to move from A to B and how to build it. So I love where you're going with this. And to your point, there's 1,000 places you can go with good work instructions, but understanding the base rules will get you a long way down that road. We see a lot of work instructions coming in from potential customers, and a lot of them could use some of this level of revision, again, to reduce the cognitive burden for your operators. If you look at the last paragraph, they know exactly where to go, calibrate, loosen, tilt, loosen, loosen, loosen. That has effectively given them the sequence of events, and they can move as fast as they have been experienced to move through that work instruction, as opposed to the top one where they have to go and find all of the key activities that they're doing within that. So I love what you're saying. This is part of why I like the no passive voice. Tell somebody what to do. That's what they're there to do. So if I take where we went with the grammar and just move it over to a little bit of what Pico brings into it. So the whole webinar theme is about around combining the best practices, using some of the key parts of grammar, understanding some key parts of the structure that needs to go through, and then using some of the advanced digital platforms that go along with it. We've been approached by a few folks of, can you use AI to write work instructions? No, you can't use AI to explicitly write work instructions. There are abilities for AIs and other checker software to go in and modify those work instructions and to help collaborate in those spaces. So if you think about the tools that go along with a lot of what Becca said, they are there to enable good work instruction uh, capabilities, whether that's layered content. So if you look at a Pico instance, we provide different layers on the images, the videos, depending on what is needed. You integrate with the other systems to be able to pull some of that really used information, but also put it in a place where they have to actively go engage with it. The other part about it is work instructions should be self-healing and interactive. Even for products that have been built for 30 years, things change. You might have had a change in supplier. You might have a new worker. You might have a new tool. Something might have changed over the 30 years. Being able to go find those work instructions and engage with them instantly and get them deployed reduces the chance that something goes wrong with those work instructions. And then also managing any change control that goes along with it. So as Becca has pointed out about half dozen times through this presentation, someone might have written a pretty decent work instruction and you've iterated on it. Understanding where that path has come from will be helpful, particularly as you get younger engineers to come in to understand what has come before them and understand why the work instruction was created that way. And then my favorite part about a good tool is, to Becca's point, is where's the verbs not hitting. Give somebody some opportunity to give you some feedback. We call that self-healing work instructions, where it's a full cycle of communication on the way past. But link all of these tools, link good grammar, link good structure with some of the other digital tools out there, and you'll find just how powerful it is. It's not 1+1 anymore. It's one equals two. It's 1+1 equals a lot. So moving through that. Thanks, Becca, for kind of walking us through the structure that we want to go with it. We have one more poll question for everybody out there. Would love to get your last piece of feedback on that, and then we will answer some questions as they've kind of come in. So if we pop our last question up. So our last poll question to get some feedback is, what's the most common root cause of work instructions? Where do you all see quality errors or delivery errors or just common errors coming back off of your work instructions? Is it poorly written steps? Is it a lack of visual aid? Is it outdated information? We've got a question here about how often you should update them, so we'll answer that in a second. Is it not tailored to the user's skill level? So these are really interesting layered set of questions that go along with creating work instructions. Where do you all see your challenges around the work instructions and creating errors? Right. So pop that up. It's pretty evenly spread across the first three, which is poorly written steps, lack of visual aids, taking a little bit of a lead, and then outdated information. Having run a number of factories across my career, those first three really probably hit home in my experience. Also, I don't know if it's what you see also, Becca, with your clients and where they're going. The tailored to skill level is actually a really fine art, and Becca hit on it a couple pieces there. But if you're really crisp and clear with the grammar that you used, and that's why we lean so heavy into grammar in this advanced one, is you actually then are tailoring it for a skill level. So the more skilled they are, they will go and pick pieces out. If they're early in their career, they'll read the whole paragraph and then associate that to any other sundry pieces of information that's in the work instruction. So using that structure that Becca gave you does singularly tailor it to that. So I'm glad we answered that. So appreciate everybody giving some feedback. That is our full panel today. If you want some next steps, feel free to go download our work instructions. It's free access up to 10 users across the site, no strings attached on there. We have worked with Becca to provide some work instructions that you can download also from our website. And then honestly, you go find Becca and have her review some of what you're doing and have her give you some guidance. They say the best way to learn is from a coach. So I would recommend there. Let's jump over to some questions now. What do you say, Becca?
Let's do it.
All right. So the first one, what's the best way to test if a work instruction is clear before using it on the shop floor? Do you want to try that one?
Yeah, I'll go for it. So really with this one, I'll just use the term guinea pig. You just get yourself a guinea pig. So somebody who is on the shop floor, who is an average worker, I would not take your team lead who's been there for 30 years and they're just an expert and they're also a tip-top worker and they read every word and they have great reading comprehension. I would just take your average worker, set aside some time, let them know, hey, this is just going to be kind of an easy hour or two for you. You know, you're getting paid like usual, and you're going to be in this over in this quiet and maybe air conditioned little spot if you can set them up that way, and just have them go through the procedure having said nothing. That is the key. So you don't want to tell them, you don't want to give them any prefaces. I wouldn't tell them anything about the equipment, anything about the procedure. Just say, here's your procedure. Act like you've just been maybe rotated to this station for the day for ergonomic reasons. Maybe, hopefully, all of you guys are doing that with your workers. So you're being rotated to station 2132 for ergonomic reasons. Pretend you've never seen this piece of equipment before, but it's brand new for you, and just go for it. And let them know, of course, it's no strings attached. They're not going to be at fault. Let them know, I need to know where I have messed up in writing this procedure. It is my fault if you don't do this procedure correctly or how I meant to have written it. So I am asking you to do this so that I can see where my faults are. So just being really careful to let them know mistakes are completely fine because this is for you, not for them. They're not being judged for it. So that's a great way to approach it.
I love that. I love that. And just from a manufacturing leader perspective, engaging with the shop floor folks early as possible, I think that's where you opened up with, is find somebody that's going to do the work and get them to provide you feedback. I don't think that you can do anything more powerful than that, because they are the folks that are going to be operating. They're going to feel involved and they're going to feel engaged in the process as opposed to it being dictatorial and passed down. So I love the way you answered that, and I would fully agree with that. Right, let's take another one. How often should you update your digital work instructions? I feel like that's a horses for courses answer. So you want to jump on that one first, Becca, and I'll give some color afterwards.
Sure. Yeah, there are kind of a couple ways to answer this, and I actually get this question a lot, and it's a two-parter for me. The first one is, it seems obvious, I guess, but it really is the most direct answer. Anytime there's a change. So people wonder, should I wait and just do it monthly or quarterly? Do it anytime there's a change, particularly if it's going to affect a metric. So if it's going to affect, for example, your QCDs, your quality, your cost, your delivery, safety, especially if it's a safety issue, get that changed immediately. But if it's going to affect a metric in particular, just change it right away. I wouldn't save it for any later time because you're just asking for errors, you're asking for it to be forgotten. Just do it right away. And then the other part of the answer is, do set up an audit schedule. I know everyone hates that word audit. No one wants to set aside time for it. One thing you can do, and this is actually something I've seen clients do even without my recommendation, but for example, actually, this is something even one of the companies did where I was an engineer. So they had us doing audits of procedures. And for every X number of procedures, or maybe every department really it was that you audited, you got an extra PTO. So you got to earn that by basically doing something that was outside of your job. So you can assign an engineer to say, you're going to review Fab Shop 3 down on the south end. every year, and you're going to get maybe a half day of PTO for that. And just set that up to where somebody's going through it and double checking that all those procedures still make sense, and setting aside time too for that feedback, just like Brian was talking about. I'm huge on feedback. I don't care who you are, how great you are at writing procedures. If you're not the one running the equipment, you are not the final say. The person who is actually running the equipment is the only person who can say whether the procedure is effective. And you want that feedback as quickly as possible, which is why even a year can be a little bit of quite a length of time. I would try to go sooner than that, but people are going to forget where the pitfalls in the procedure are because they'll remember how to run that equipment. They'll forget, oh yeah, it doesn't actually tell you to flip the blue switch. They'll forget that. So you want to get that feedback on a regular basis, at least annually.
I love that. And once you move to digital work instructions, you get a lot more proactive feedback on the way through, just to add a layer to that. So I'm with you. Work instructions should be reviewed at least annually if they're on paper. Once you move to digital tools, you'll start seeing where you're getting some of the drift on those work instructions, or you're starting to see errors creep in, or where you're getting somebody trying to skip steps, or somebody's not understanding. And so if you have digital tools, they can capture some of that feedback. They can kind of give you some of those statistics, and effectively moves it from a, we're going to do it to backstop the process by reviewing our work instructions, to a, we need to go review our work instructions for a reason moment. So there's a continuum there as for how often you should update your work instructions, I think. And I think that's where I'd go with that one. Let's move down. What is the best way to reference other documents into work instructions?
It
Do you
then
want to do you want
Yeah,
to do the paper
kind of
side?
depends on whether, yeah, it's paper or digital. My go-to for this is just the number. So ideally, you should have a number associated with your procedure. If you don't and you just have a title, that's okay too. I guess the key here is don't have both of them and don't add additional information. So I'll see procedures, for example, that will say, refer to procedure 1234, installing the ZX170 motor revision A. That's way too much information. Put the number or the title and nothing else. I would definitely not put a revision because you're just opening yourself up to errors, not only in terms of the procedure itself, which is going to make it very confusing, but you're opening yourself up to issues with auditors. Say, for example, if you're ISO 9001 or any other type of documentation standard. So the summary of what I'm saying is the simplest way possible. That just keeps it as clean as possible and opens you up to as few errors as possible.
100%. And hand in hand with the when and how often to review your work instructions, the more active links you have to other documents in your work instructions, you probably need to keep some kind of register as to how often you need to double check that those references are up to date. When you, again, moving to the digital side, you're moving from a reactive maintenance of the work instruction to a proactive maintenance. You can create dynamic links to where the document is stored. You can create errors that come back and say if the document has been updated and hasn't loaded correctly. There's a number of tools that go along with it. So as you kind of move the journey off of paper and into digital, there are things you can put in place to help manage that. You can link it to a QMS system. You can link it to a few other places, document management systems, or a PLM, depending on where those documents are coming from. And you effectively create a more of a web that gives you some feedback. So it's not dependent on yourself or an engineer to go back and find those changes, but those changes are then flagged to you as you go, and then captured that something has changed so that you know when it changed through. That's a great question. Um, we have another question here. I'll jump on this one first. What is wrong with the style of work instruction that you had the red X through on the previous? Well, I want to give context on the previous slide. The context notes that you mentioned were great. Thanks. So we had a slide here. Let me jump back into the slides here, where this is actually, from a digital paperwork point of view, a fairly good work instruction focus. It's a standard format, which is one of the key things I would push people towards as in a good practice. Put the picture in one place, put the words on the other. There are a few grammatical challenges in and around with that one. It also has context of when it was last updated, who the author are. This slide's more referencing towards as you've gone from a good practice in paper, the next big step is to jump over to the digital platform, effectively making those more dynamic pictures, giving layered content that goes along with it, and creating your work instructions as a proactive part of your manufacturing process, as opposed to something that needs to reactively be maintained and updated. It's a great question. I appreciate that feedback and clarification. We could probably change that graphic to an arrow to point that this is kind of the next step of where this goes. Right. I think we have a couple other questions, some challenges around people being illiterate. I think there's one question that people see is people having challenge of understanding the words on there. Do you want to talk a little bit about why you use those specific grammar tools for folks that are still learning a language or B, another language?
Yes, this entire topic, everything I've talked about, is so key for people who have a low literacy level. Now, if they are truly, truly illiterate and they actually cannot read, we're really looking at something even beyond what I'm covering in this webinar. You would need to look at, is there a way that you can set them up with a community college? Maybe you could see if the community college could even partner with you and come in and do some basic literacy lessons. Just because the concepts I'm talking about are to get language as simple as possible, but if they truly can't read, we do need another step even before what we're talking about in this webinar. But aside from the group of people that is truly illiterate, and we're talking about people who maybe have a low reading comprehension level or don't speak English as a first language, you're really looking at mainly the concepts that I talked today. Again, I mean, this is an enormous topic that there is research done on it. People have PhDs on it. There are textbooks on it. It's a very, very deep topic, but for the most part, simple, simple, simple wording. So even something that I talked about in the basic webinar, for example, is using simple words that everybody knows. So the word activate. Now, you might not be able to get away from the word activate. There are times where you have to use that, but do you really have to? Can you just use the word start? A lot more people, even if they are not a native speaker of English, are going to know the word start. That's a very common word compared with activate or contain. Do you have to use contain, or can you just say have or has? That is so much simpler. So looking at the most simplistic way that you can word something, and even again, diving into the grammar. So, there must have been 5 bolts in the drawer. Check if there are 5 bolts in the drawer. Just check. You don't need to say there must have been. Just cut down on all those words and get down to that simple, just what is the meat of the verb that you're trying to get them to do. So that's how you're going to be able to help people who don't speak English as their native language or have a low reading comprehension level.
I love that. And then there's other things you can layer on that. So once you move into the digital realm with your work instructions, providing videos, providing linked drawings, providing some level of confirmation of what people are seeing. So if you create a simple work instruction line, like Becca said, start drilling this, activating that to number one, and then on a video pops up and it actually shows somebody doing a 5-second drill. It also gives people a context of where they're supposed to be going, but B also then starts helping them understand the English words that are going with those activities. So you're kind of getting a 2-for-1, and then creating other layered content. So working around the problem, giving people annotations, things like that that go along with it, are a really, really powerful tool that goes along with creating those good simple words and grammars. Is some of those digital tools to enable people. And then where if you go beyond just digital work instructions, do a whole connected space, like our software, if they have a torque gun, they get feedback from our software of whether they completed the action correct or not. So not only are you asking them to read it, then you're getting the process to actually confirm that they did it right. And so there's a whole sequence of events that effectively move you from a crawl, walk, run of creating good work instructions to actually linking them into an entire communication cycle that goes along with it. It's a really good question and a really important one, particularly as we try and solve some of the labor challenges that are out there. Go
I
along with it.
love that question. That was awesome. And the one final bit that I want to tack on that I'm just thinking about is if you do have members of your workforce who are illiterate, please don't try to teach them to read yourself if you don't have a background in doing that, because that is an entire topic on its own. Somebody who is trained in the concepts of pedagogy and how to teach, particularly an adult, how to read, that is highly specialized, and you really want to get that right from the start. So please do try to partner with the community college. Try and, I mean, even just look up some kind of program maybe that you can get started with. But what I'm saying is, please don't sit down with them with a work instruction and say, I'm going to teach you to read. Just, you want to set them up for success is really what I'm getting at there.
I love that. We have a great comment here on the same topic of Legos. Instructions are universal without words. So if you can get somebody to build something with simple pictures of blocks, it does lead you. There are some manufacturing companies out there that have more complex processes, but the thought pattern that goes into a Lego work instruction lands that same thing. If you can get something so prescriptive with the images that come along with it, it's a very powerful way to engage. And even I'll answer the last question here. What are the challenges of the transition from paper to digital work instructions, and how can they be avoided? Some of them can't be avoided. Some of them just need to be taken head on. But the biggest challenges of moving from paper to digital is just to start. People think that because they don't have a screen out there, if they don't have some kind of engagement tool already there, that they can't go do that. There are softwares. Ours doesn't even require that you have a computer. You just need a monitor to engage with it. I know some of the other softwares that do the same thing, that are effectively hosted remotely, so you provide the feedback on there. And then really where you get to of challenging those that transition isn't necessarily avoiding it, but it's creating that feedback loop. So move your work instructions into a structured environment, create a way that the operator can give you feedback as you do transition into that. What we're seeing a lot of folks do as they move from paper to digital is the capture of that traveling knowledge, that ethereal traveling knowledge that a lot of folks talk about, is actually being challenged. You're supposed to do it, follow ABC process, and an operator has been doing ACB for 15 years. What you really want is you're challenging your, well, both your rewrites of your work instructions, but also particularly as you move to the digital work instruction, is to get that knowledge out of the operator of, are the operator correct, or is the engineering correct, or does it not matter? And you sequence those events depending on what the actual result there is. So my biggest suggestion for those that do want to move to digital is start. And it's part of why we provide ours for free. It's not a bait for anybody. It literally just, we know the power of good work instructions, and that being a easy piece of us to give out there to help folks move in the digital path and start their industry 4.0 journey. Is part of why we've put that out there. So I appreciate everybody taking some time to join us today. We've got a couple quick questions so we can get some feedback. So if we can do some further continued webinars for you all, some more information, we'll pop those questions up now, I believe. Oh, there. Did that just pop up for everybody? Can I just cancel it out? Right. Well, I want to thank Becca for coming and joining us again today. Been a really engaging conversation. I know how important it is to have good work instructions, and it is kind of the first port of call between operators and the designed intent is the work instruction. And poor work instructions, at least speaking from my experience, leads to a lot of challenges that only grow downhill as you move a product through. So um, don't try and do everything in the work instruction perfectly all at once if you can't, but at least start on the journey. Understand that it is a continuous improvement activity to improve your work instructions, move further into some of the grammar challenges that Becca mentioned. Any other parting thoughts you want to leave folks with, Becca, before we close for today?
Not really. I'm just very excited to see what everybody does with it. And if you have questions, I obviously love talking about grammar. So please feel free. My contact information is on my website. I am also really active on LinkedIn. So please connect with me. I promise, I always add this, by the way, I will never, ever, ever spam you. I promise. You are not going to get any kind of cold call. You're not going to be put on an email list. So please don't be afraid to send me a connection request or send me an email. I will leave you alone.
Appreciate it, Becca, and we appreciate you taking an hour out today to come help explain good work instructions today. We very much value your input. If anybody wants to reach out to us, yeah, connect with Becca or myself on LinkedIn or follow any of these links that we've got here on the screen. The survey will pop up now as we close the webinar. Thanks everybody for spending some time with us today, and we look forward to seeing you on our next webinar. Take care for now.
Thank you all.